Good morning, and welcome to Issues That Matter. And I'm your host, Rob Piccone, and we are honored and privileged to have a return guest today, Dr. Terri Col'on. Dr. Terri Col'on she's very much affiliated, one of the founding partners, you might say, with the Wyatt Frost Memorial Foundation.
Correct.
Terri, tell us about the Wyatt Frost Memorial Foundation.
The Wyatt Frost Memorial Foundation was founded in honor of the name Wyatt Frost. Wyatt was my grandson, and several of the family members have founded a foundation for him. He lost his life in a tragic car accident on the main turnpike. Some of you may have heard about it. It was November 18th, 2016, and that was that day that the traffic backed up for hours and hours and hours. And Wyatt's vehicle and his driver, Earl Gray, were hit from behind by a truck driver who was distracted. And so we decided to try to do something in his memory. Wyatt was a happy little guy. He's 5 years old. Wyatt, not defined, autism didn't define him, but he had autism. And so communication for him was challenging, and he just was a really happy guy and communicated very well through his expressions. And he loved to be happy, and he loved for those around him to be happy. So we started a foundation in which we are very fond of the Morrison Center, where he attended his preschool years. And we are funding preschool scholarships for the Morrison Center so that we can form inclusive educational classrooms.
If a person wanted to make a donation to the foundation, how would they go about that?
They could go to our website, www.wyattfrostfoundation.org, and there's a donate button they could click on there.
And if memory serves me correctly, which in my case is always a significant question, but if memory serves me correctly, you have a walk event coming up very shortly?
We do. This Saturday, June 23rd at 9 a.m. at the Kennebunk Elementary School. We have a 5K walk, and we also have a family walk. The 5K starts at 9 o'clock, and the family walk on the Eastern Trail is 11 o'clock. People can go to the website to register, or they can just show up and register then. It costs the same.
Well, and one of the things that I was honored with this morning, when Dr. Col'on came, she very quickly presented me a very smart-looking hat, Wyatt Frost Memorial Foundation, which will be on sale at the walk, I believe.
Yes.
And I think it's a very smart-looking hat. It's so smart-looking, it's going to give people the wrong impression of my intelligence. Oh. But I don't want to go there.
The hat has our logo on it. It has a little boy riding a elephant. Wyatt was very fond of elephants.
What I took note of the elephant is that it's in rainbow colors.
The little boy is in rainbow colors, and that's the autism symbol, and the little puzzle pieces. And so the little boy with the puzzle pieces represents Wyatt, who had autism, riding an elephant because he was just crazy about elephants. He had probably over 200 stuffed elephants in his room. And so that's how we came up with the logo. We'll also have T-shirts there.
Yeah, I saw an interesting factoid when I was doing some reading about autism. There is a significant difference in prevalence between male and female.
There is. The latest statistics that I'm aware of, and I'm not a statistician on autism, but the latest ones I heard were that 1 in 58 children will be affected by autism somewhere on the spectrum. And when we think about autism, we think about it as a wide range from someone being completely nonverbal to maybe someone having a very mild case. It does affect males more than females. I don't know what the statistics are on that. And it affects African American males more than it does other race males.
Yeah. And let me put my reading glasses on. Let's see, where is it? 1/3 of the people with autism have an intellectual disability.
Some have developmental delays. It's often hard to tell if a child has developmental delays at a young age because development is such a wide range. You go in the doctor's office, you see a chart that says your child should be doing X, Y, and Z by 12 months. And in reality, normal, typical development could range anywhere from 12, 6 months one way or 6 months another way. And as children get older, a year one way or the other. So it's really hard to determine at a young age that a child has autism. But the earlier the intervention, the better. I realized that something was wrong with Wyatt when he was about 18 months, and I came up behind him and I spoke to him, and he didn't turn around and look at me, and I thought he had a hearing difficulty. So I suggested to his parents to get him tested, and through a series of tests they found out that it wasn't hearing, that they believed he was on the autism spectrum. What was good about that was that services are provided through your town, through the state, from birth on. And so from birth to age 3, he was provided therapists that would come into the house and take care of it, speech therapy and occupational therapy. And then when he turned 3, he came under the Division of Education, and he was enrolled in Morrison Center, and they worked with him then. So some of them are developmental delays. Some of them are not. Some children just exhibit developmental delays because they don't have the capacity to interact with people to learn. But they are cognitively on level.
When I think back to the pictures that I've seen of Wyatt, he looked like a very, very happy child.
He was a little rascal. But he was very happy, playful, just like any other little boy. Just enjoyed playing, and he enjoyed nature, and it was common to see him down on the ground with his face looking at ants, and he was a typical little boy in that he was adventurous and loved to jump on the bed and climb things and get into mischief.
Yeah. Let's talk about the foundation a little bit.
Okay.
What is the goal of the foundation?
The goal of the foundation is to provide scholarships for inclusive education for preschoolers and or any other kind of special projects for people with special needs. Since we're just starting out, we want to maintain our focus narrowly because we want to do one thing and do it well, but we hope to grow that. So right now, we're working in conjunction with the Morrison Center, which, again, that's the place where Wyatt went to preschool. We're offering preschool scholarships for typically developing children.
And you just a few minutes mentioned that you're just awarding your first scholarship?
Yes, we're very excited. July 1st, we're offering our first scholarship to a 3-year-old little boy that's going to be going to the Morrison Center. And I have another application for a scholarship that we're reviewing right now. I want to emphasize that the scholarships are for typically developing children because children with special needs, their tuition is already covered by the state. And so in order to form an inclusive class, we have to have both typically developing children and atypically developing children with special needs. And public preschool is funded sporadically throughout Maine, but it's not funded at the Morrison Center. I did some research and I looked and saw how many public preschools there are in Maine, and I counted 174 within the whole state. There are 3 in Biddeford, 0 in Saco, there's 8 in Portland, there's 1 in Lyman, 0 in Kennebunk. So I was looking in the areas surrounding us. And so you think about those publicly funded preschools, 3 in Biddeford. Think about how many preschool children there are in Biddeford. That's a drop in the bucket. There is a great need for that, for publicly funded preschool. And I'm a big advocate for that because children, brain development, babies' brain development starts, their brain from birth to age 3, their brain neurons are firing 3 times faster than they are at any other time in life. So there's a lot of learning that takes place in the very early years, and it's very important to teach children things that will be with them for the rest of their life. And part of that is learning how to live in a diverse community. And so when we take children and we put them in school and we separate them out, okay, you're the typically developing children and you're the ones that are not typically developing, you have special needs. When we put them in separate rooms, are not teaching our children how to live and interact in a world that has people with special needs.
Now I think it's incredibly important to point out to the audience that you're not just speaking as somebody who's very closely related to Wyatt. Mm-hmm. You've got a professional background, which gives you a heads up on the learning process.
I do.
Talk about your background a little bit.
Okay. I'm an educator. I have been an educator for 29 years. I'm a licensed teacher. I'm a licensed principal and licensed superintendent, although I've never served as a principal and superintendent. I worked for 20 years within the classroom, and I moved around a lot, so I taught many grades just because wherever I could get a job, that's where I took a job. I taught everything from preschool through 8th grade during those 20 years, and now I teach at a community college. I'm an early childhood education instructor, and I've been doing that for 9 years. And I have students there from age 16 to age 63. And so I do have a background in early childhood education, and I have a very strong passion for that, and I've done a lot of research. I also serve on another committee where I do presentations called The First 2,000 Days, and it talks about the importance of the time from when a child is born until when they go to kindergarten, and the importance of a good quality education during that time.
Now, a teacher, I would imagine, I'd like to think, and hopefully it's the case, that a teacher may be one of the people, once a child starts school, mm-hmm. a teacher becomes critical to that child's development.
Absolutely. The teacher is critical, and the whole package is critical. I mean, the family is the child's first teacher. And so the family working with the teacher and working with the community and working with the specialists is, it takes a village to raise a child. It's really important. And one of the things I learned by teaching so many grades and so many ages is that teaching is about the relationship with the child. It's not about, I've got this bag of strategies and knowledge of content, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to impose it on you. It's about the relationship that you have with the child. And when you learn about that child, especially a child with special needs, but all children, you learn how that child learns.
I like your terminology, a child with special needs.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you say that, because when you're talking about being politically correct, we learn how to address things over time because we learn. One of the things that we learn is that a child with special needs is not a special needs child, and it's the child first language. So instead of saying why it was an autistic child, we say why it was a child with autism, because he's a child first. He's not autism first. And so, just like you said, a child with special needs, it's a child first.
Mm-hmm. And you have the foundation, and the foundation it's issuing its first scholarship. What other areas is the foundation involved in?
You mean what other projects are they? Okay. So right now it's just scholarships, but we have written the charter so that we are open to other projects. So for example, if there's a special needs child that needs a special kind of bathtub or shower or something in their house, that's something that we might fund. Or some materials that they might need at the school.
Let me raise a point of knowledge. We recently, in 2016, we got a bill passed by the state legislature to give tax credits mm-hmm. to people who make modifications to their home for safety or accessibility reasons. Mm-hmm. I might suggest to people, if they have a child with special needs that might need some special modification made to the home, to check with the main housing group.
Oh, okay.
To see if they can get a tax credit for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because modifications made to the home can be very costly.
Yes.
And if you can get a tax credit for it, that much better.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, the cost of having a special needs child can be overwhelming, especially if they have medical issues. And so any help that can be offered is helpful.
Now, the walk that's taking place this weekend or next weekend?
It's this weekend. It's June 23rd at 9 o'clock at Kennebunk Elementary School. And the 5K starts at 9 o'clock, so you can arrive as early as 8 to register, or you can register online.
And you can get this smart-looking hat.
Get that smart-looking hat.
I like hats.
I think
hats have joined with pens and eyeglasses and things like that as being the things that I lose the most.
Well, hopefully you hang on to that one.
Hopefully I will hang on to this, yes.
But you can get that smart-looking hat at the walk. I think they're $10. And there's T-shirts that you can get there as well. There's all kinds of things going on for children. There's a petting zoo. There's a sensory station where children can play in colored shaving cream and draw. There's face painting. There's the walk itself for the families. And there's some good food to eat too.
And is there going to be food there?
Oh yeah, there will be some food, and we have some. I don't know all the food, but I know that Subway has generously donated some delicious sandwiches, and I know we have some delicious donuts from Dunkin' Donuts. I know we have some fruit from Cummings Market, so I'm not sure what else there is, but I know that there's always, last year there was so much food that you had to go on the walk to exercise off some of the calories.
Now, in the best of all worlds, and I'm fully aware that we do not necessarily live in the best of all worlds. In fact, I would venture to say that it would probably be a unanimous thought that we do not live in the best of all worlds. But in the best of all worlds, where do you see the foundation going off into the future?
I think anything that grows has to grow slowly in order for it to stand and make a good foundation, even though I'd like to see it just take off. I'd like to see it growing and offer more scholarships, more than 2 or 3 scholarships a year. I'd like to see us venture out into other schools besides Morrison Center. I'd like to see eventually a foundation director that could spend time that's needed to build those little things that we're finding out that we need to do, like how to contact people and how to keep the books and all that kind of stuff, receipts, those sort of things. Just the details of running a foundation. I'd like to see a director of that as well.
Let's talk a little about the Morrison Center.
Okay.
Give us some background on the Morrison Center. What they do.
So the Morrison Center is a center for children with special needs. They have preschool class, and they also have a program for adults. And I'm not sure, the one in Scarborough I think has different grades. The one in Wells, though, is a preschool center. It has just expanded. They had one classroom, and they had an adult classroom there for adults with special needs, and that has grown. And so they've moved out into another facility, and so they have 2 classrooms now. So they have spaces open, and hence we have space to put typically developing children in there. They have therapists that come and work there with the children with special needs. They're just fabulous. They're loving and kind. The children thrive there, and we're really very happy to partner with them.
Well, hopefully you have the same sense about partnering with us.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate getting the word out there.
And I look forward to the future. And I'm not giving you an indication that the show is over yet. It's not. So you can don't worry about that. But I am not a fan of one and done, which I think we've proven by having one this year as a follow-up to last year's show. And I would look forward to having you on next year and the year after that, and so on off into the future until the foundation is really running full speed. And,
thank you.
What else? You have another fundraising event that we talked about very briefly.
We have a golf tournament that we had in May. We'll have it again next year. We'll try, if you get on our mailing list, we will update you on that. It's at the Dutch Elm Golf Course. They generously sponsor us in Arundel. they had a lot of fun this past year and raised some money and got the word out about the foundation. They even had a hole-in-one prize of a new car, but no one won it.
It's one thing to have the prize. It's another thing to have a golfer who gets a hole-in-one.
Right, right. So all of you golfers out there, you know, Tiger Woods, come on.
Well, I used to play golf. I never played it well,
Yeah.
but I played at it. And from what I understand, just this past weekend was U.S. Open, and Phil Mickelson, who's a big name in golf, did something I became an expert at. But I did it better than him.
And what was that?
And I did it sooner than him. He scored a 10 on a par 3 hole.
Oh.
I can't tell you how many times I've done that. And he got all kinds of notoriety for it.
Why don't you get notoriety for that?
Because it was too common.
Well.
But in any event, you have the tournament, you have the walk, and I am familiar with walks. We have that for the MS Society every year. But even though we have it every year, it's always a challenge. It's always a challenge.
It's a lot of work.
How do you get the word out there?
Well, that's one of the things that we're learning. We have an email list from last year's participants, so we emailed them, and the ones that bounced back, we sent them letters. We put up signs, we put things on our website, and we also use social media and try to get things out on Facebook. So that's kind of what we're learning, and this year I think we'd like to develop a marketing plan. Since none of us have a background in marketing, we would really need to, if anyone has any good advice, please send it to our foundation. So we're looking into that.
What would you say is the biggest misconception that a person might have relative to a child with special needs?
I think in terms of special needs is what that child is capable of. People often hear a diagnosis and they label that child and limit that child. And that's why I think inclusive education is important, because the research is very clear. It shows that children that have, even if they have a cognitive disability, they're in a class with typically developing children. The children that are in the inclusive class versus the children that are separated into their special needs and they're supposed to get all attention in their special needs, and the children that are in the typically developing class. The children in the inclusive class, they have better social skills, both sets, typical and atypical. They have better social skills, they have more friends, and interestingly enough, both sets, the special needs and the typical children, have higher test scores, academic test scores, than those that are in separate classes. I thought that was pretty interesting. And when you think about what goes on in that class, because you have children that are this level and children that are this level, the biggest misconception, I think, is that people think that their child is going to be held back by that. The teacher's going to be giving that child too much attention. And nothing could be further from the truth. What we find in those classrooms is that, think about when you learned how to ride a bike and who taught you how to ride a bike. For a lot of people, who taught them how to ride a bike might have been their friend. My father taught me how to ride my bike, but maybe a buddy taught you. And what do? You get on that bike and you don't get off until you can make it because your buddy is teaching you. The same sort of thing happens in inclusive classrooms. Their buddies teach each other. Or when you see a higher level, you want to reach that level. So for a child who's in a special needs class and there's only children in their special needs, they're going to reach the level at the highest level that they see. If a child with special needs is in a class with children that are higher functioning, those are their friends. They're going to want to do more. They're going to want to excel because their friend is excelling. And when their friend takes the time to show them how to excel, they want to do it even more. Also, research shows that for the typically developing child, that child is explaining something to someone else, that child is learning it more for themselves. So the research shows also that children who teach other children retain more knowledge.
Do you think that some of the limitations that are placed upon special needs children are placed on them in error? I know one of the things I read this morning about this young lady who special needs is graduated from college.
Absolutely. I think it's well-meaning, but when you put a label on something, sometimes people let that label define them. And other people say, that's just a label and it's not going to define me. Yes, it's part of who I am, but it's not going to define me. I remember when I found out my son had Tourette syndrome. I was devastated. Oh my gosh, my son has Tourette syndrome. What am I going to do? Oh, poor thing. And then the next day, after I sulked about it, I woke up and I looked at my son, and he was the same cute little kid, smart as a whip. I realized he's the same child he was the day before I had the diagnosis. What's the difference? The difference is I'm sitting and sulking about it. I don't need to sit and sulk about it. We're just gonna, this is part of who he is, and we'll address it, but he's still the same person. So I think labels define people, or they allow people to define them, and I think that holds people back.
You know, one of the things that I was told back in the early days of my diagnosis with MS was that don't let the MS define you. You define the MS. It's going to impact you differently than it might impact anybody else. And I found that to be incredibly important, incredibly important. And one of the other things that I read about this young lady is that when she was younger, she was being held back because of bullying.
It is. Bullying is, and I think, again, when we separate our children and then all of a sudden put them together later on and expect them to understand each other, someone that's very different than them, what do? They don't know how to deal with it. When you start them from a very young age, they grow up with that. I worked in a school where we didn't have an inclusion, but the special ed kids would come out at lunchtime and they would eat in the lunchroom with our other children. And the lunch was set so that the children could sit wherever they wanted in the lunchroom. They didn't have to sit at a prescribed table. And what was interesting to me were the youngest children, the kindergartners, the first graders, would go right up to the table where the child was, who was nonverbal, who was, in a wheelchair, who was eating baby food and having to be fed because they had such severe disabilities. And young children would go right up and sit with them. And the child with disabilities might put out their hand and they'd go over and give them a high five. They knew their name. They weren't afraid of them. Children that are separated become fearful of the unknown and someone that's different than them, and they bully. I had two girls in a fourth grade class I taught. They had, both of them had an IQ of 68, and under 70 is considered educable, mentally challenged. So they were considered, in the old world, retarded. We don't use that word anymore, but that's the word that they were considered. Those girls went on and they would go to get special help every day, but their families were incredibly strong, and they weren't I don't even think they were high school graduates, but they were incredibly supportive. And I saw the mother later on, several years later, and she said that her daughter and her daughter's friend, both these girls, had graduated from high school, and both of them had made the honor roll every single term until they graduated high school with IQs of only 68. And so I tell people, and I used to have this up in my classroom, your I will is more important than your IQ. Your desire to do well is more important than how smart you are. I've also had students who were incredibly intelligent, gifted, but wasted that and didn't do anything with it. So again, I think labels, numbers can hold people back.
One of my firmly held beliefs that I learned over the course of years of my career is that you don't create problems, or I should say, circumstances don't create problems. Circumstances happen. It's how you react to the circumstance, and all too often is where the problem develops. And when you're dealing with special needs children, the child is capable of doing more than we could ever imagine a child is capable of doing.
Yes.
It's the reaction that we get from the interaction with that special needs child that creates the problem.
Yes, it is. The reactions oftentimes, like I said, when I found out my son had Tourette's, oh, woe is me, and what am I going to do? I'm feeling sorry for myself. And we all have junk that happens in our life. Everyone does. And like you said, it's how you react to that. And but I can't tell you how important the family is to the support system for a child with special needs, but really for any child in school. When we talk about early childhood education, one of the first things that we include in our plans are our families, and because we just know how important that is.
Now, I take it your daughter was the mother of Wyatt? Or
No, my son.
Your son
my
is his
son,
father.
Aaron. Aaron and Jenna Frost were the parents of Wyatt, and Aaron is my son.
I assume they'll be at the golf tournament? Or not golf, the walk.
Oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah, they'll be there. We also have a life-size elephant that walks around and greets children.
A life-size elephant.
Yes, it's a costume, that someone is wearing. It walks around, and he's our mascot, so he'll be there, and it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun.
That's the purpose.
It is. Again, Wyatt would want people to be happy, to have lots of fun. He would be running around petting animals.
The pictures that I saw of Wyatt on the foundation website, incredibly happy.
Yes.
Big
Yep.
smile on his face.
Yep. He was a really happy kid, and if you weren't happy, you'd be scolding him for something, and he'd come along and go like this to your face, happy. Is that a way of turning? You couldn't be mad at him.
Oh, no question was a tragedy what took place.
It was such a loss for us, and we miss him every day.
Well, you're doing good stuff.
That's what we hope to do. We hope to really give him a legacy of really teaching people that they can be friends, that they can live in harmony, that everyone has something to contribute. Wyatt's contribution was making people happy. Every child has something to contribute, whether you have special needs or whether you're typically developing, they all do.
Why don't you go over again right now how a person can make donation?
A person can make donations by going to our website, www.wyattfrostfoundation.org, and there's a donate button. Just click on the donate button.
Thank you very much for being on the show. Is there anything else that you would like to say or point out that we have not yet covered?
One of the statistics that I found in my research is that when you look at the amount of special needs children in Maine has a relatively low amount of special needs children in comparison to other states. Maine has about 17,000 special needs children. However, and they diagnosed that came to that statistic by looking at birth through age 20, not in an institution. However, when you look at the percentage of those children, special needs, compared to the children of Maine in the same age group, it's 6.2%. That's the highest percentage in the nation of children with special needs. Now, it's not by population, it is by percentage. And so when you look at that, why does inclusive education matter to people in Maine? Because you're going to have a higher percentage of children growing into adults with special needs living in your communities and being part of your community. And so people need to understand how to interact with those children and how to welcome those people as part of their community, whether it be jobs, organizations, just being neighbors. you need to understand that you're going to have the highest amount in the nation. 6.2% of your population will grow into adults that have special needs. And it's important to understand that and not be segregated all through school, and teaching our children how to interact with people that are different than them and learn to interact in your community.
Now, you mentioned when you first started talking about this, about Maine having the lowest amount of numbers.
It has a low, I didn't say lowest, it has a low amount of children with special needs. It has 17,000 of documented children birth to age 20.
There's the key.
Documented, yes. And not institutionalized, because some children are in group homes.
I would suspect, this is purely a suspicion, I would call it a logical suspicion. Maine is a very, very rural state. And I suspect in those rural areas of the state, there are probably many children that do have special needs that go unrecognized.
I would agree with you. That's one of the speculations of why they believe that autism is on the rise, that they believe that it's not necessarily on the rise, but that these rural areas are being reached into, and they're finding pockets, in very rural areas, and diagnosing even more children with special needs and with autism.
What type of, and you may or may not be versed in this, I don't know, but what type of modifications might be made to the home of a child with special needs? Can you think of any particular modifications that might need to be made?
I think of protective measures. Sometimes children with special needs don't understand that they can't go beyond a certain area, so there might be maybe a fence put up in the yard so the child can't run out into the road.
Or blockades of some type on stairways.
Yes, things like that. If you that's for a child with autism, because they tend to bolt and run. But a child with special needs, it just depends on what their need is. If they're in a wheelchair, then maybe it's a ramp, maybe it's a adaptable shower, so that when the child's small, you can lift them up and stick them into the bathtub. But as they grow, they're going to need. You can't just do that.
Our conversation today has opened my eyes up. I had never thought about this. When we talk about accessibility and safety, we tend to think about things that people that have recognized disabilities, maybe multiple sclerosis, might be cerebral palsy, something like that. And we don't think about the hardships that a child could have in a home. We think about the hardships that the older people, the elderly people. Maine also has the eldest population in the country, in addition to the oldest housing stock in the country, which is a double whammy, you might say. But you don't think about children,
right?
And their special needs. So I think just having this conversation has opened my eyes up to something that they should have been opened up a long time ago. But it never came up.
Right, because children don't have a voice, so we have to be their voice. So I think Maine is moving towards more inclusive education, but it's still, people think that it's expensive. Special education is expensive. Inclusive education isn't any more expensive than special ed. If a child has to have a one-on-one aid, they can have it in the inclusive classroom, or they can have it in the separated classroom. It doesn't cost any more to have inclusive education. Think about if you were a child with special needs and you were to go to a classroom and you weren't part of that class. So Bob showed up at the classroom, and the teacher says, "Boys and girls, we have a visitor today. Come on in, Bob. Sit over there. We have a desk for you." And you participate in an activity and then go back to your classroom. Think about what it would be like if Bob showed up at that classroom every day and the teacher greeted Bob. "Hi, Bob, how are you today? Hi, Jane, how are you today? Hi, Terry, how are you today?" Just like you're one of the other people in that class. There's a difference in belonging to a class versus dropping in and visiting. Nobody wants to be the visitor. No child wants to be the visitor. They want to belong. And so if you have a child that comes to that class, and inclusive education brings the services to the class. So if the special ed teacher comes into the class, the aide is with the child during the day. That child knows the children in the classroom. The children in the classroom know that child. That child isn't separated out anymore. Inclusive education is all about that. It's about bringing the children into the class. Maine is getting better at that, but and I would say that's the same across the nation. It's a slow growing process, but eventually that's where it's headed.
Talk a little bit about the Morrison Center.
The Morrison Center, again, is the early childhood education center for children with special needs. We're trying to form an inclusive classroom by giving scholarships to children for preschool that are typically developing. So I also want to say, by the way, if you are interested in applying for a scholarship, go to our website, www.wyattfrostfoundation.org, and there is a section where it says contact, and go down to the message section and put your name and information where we can send information to you regarding scholarships. And so the Morrison Center is partnering with us to form inclusive classrooms.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
It was enlightening.
Thank you very much. I
And
appreciate
I look very much forward to having one again next year.
Next year, we look forward to telling you all about our scholarship recipients and the good work that's being done there at the Morrison Center. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, good luck on the walk event tomorrow. Best of good fortune to everybody that's involved. If my calendar and my clock work well, I may stop by tomorrow.
That would be great.
And check out the food.
Yep. Okay, thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you as a guest.
Thank you.
And folks, I think that's a wrap. Like the hat. Love this hat. I like the rainbow colors. Have a great day. Take care of yourself. Simplify your life. And may God bless you. Bye-bye.